Educating students in rural settings is an important part of public education in America. More than half of all school districts and a third of all public schools are in rural areas. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, over 12 million students attend a rural public elementary or secondary school, accounting for 25% of all public school students. Unrecognized by most Americans and often overshadowed by the nation's attention to dropout challenges in urban settings, more than 1/5 of public schools in rural America have higher than average dropout rates. Because of their remote locations and more limited resources, schools in rural communities often have less access to high-quality technical assistance than schools in other communities. For this reason, the U.S. Department of Education's High School Graduation Initiative program provided dropout prevention support and technical assistance to grantees and districts across the country. This video highlights dropout prevention efforts in rural districts and schools in Mississippi. Mississippi confronts numerous historic, economic, and geographic challenges that demand unique and locally specific dropout prevention solutions. While state initiatives are continually being implemented, local efforts to address these hurdles have turned to collaboration of resources as well as community and business involvement to provide funding, expertise, and programs that benefit students academically and behaviorally. These approaches provide rural students the opportunity to stay in school, graduate, and become successful members of their communities.
It's difficult here because we don't have a lot of industries. We don't have a lot of businesses that would come in and give us things for the children. We are a small community. We don't have a lot to offer, so therefore you just don't have those things that big cities or large school districts would have. So we're just few, in reference to businesses.
And so I think we're somewhere around the 145, 146 school districts. And out of that number, we have approximately 111 of those districts that are rural. The majority of the school districts in Mississippi are rural, so what that means is the majority of our students are in rural districts, and counties and communities. And so the question becomes, what's considered, we've had this conversation, what's considered rural? We have a lot of districts, a lot of communities where the school is the business. That's industry in that particular district. And so that's all they have. You have some, red lights, maybe 1 or 2 stop signs. So when you start looking at rural areas, you have to it differs from one end of the state to the other. Rural in North Mississippi is definitely going to be different from rural down in southern Mississippi.
So the Center for Education Innovation is a statewide nonprofit education intermediary. Although our offices are housed in Jackson, Mississippi, we work statewide, supporting local communities, school districts, and early care providers, linking them to resources, technical assistance, and training and best practices to improve education throughout the state. We focus on the state's most vulnerable children, which in most cases are areas that are very rural in nature, high poverty, with the lowest graduation rates or lowest achievement and attainment of districts in the state. Well, initially the center was created in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. I tell people that we are the silver lining behind the cloud of Katrina, and the State Department of Education actually started the center's work by receiving a sizable grant from the W.K. Kellogg Foundation to transform education in the state of Mississippi, starting with the most vulnerable children in the most rural and isolated areas. And the Mississippi Delta comes to mind. That's the first area that we began to do our major work, providing reading coaches to school districts in need, actually providing the seed money to start certain foundations in that area so that they could in turn leverage additional funding to support the needs of those local rural school districts. In our work, we've found that the lack of high quality early childhood education is a major issue, particularly in the Delta. In most Delta communities, Head Start is really one of the few providers. There are some counties in the state where there's no primary early childhood child care facility. It's mainly Head Start. And when you consider the fact that Head Start serves about 27,000 children in the state, it leaves a big void for those folks who make too much money to qualify to participate in Head Start. We feel that the best dropout prevention is early intervention, and that's the starting point for much of our work.
The early warning system was a grant that was given to us. Department of Education was funded through the federal government, and it started back in 2009. I became a part of it in 2013, the summer of 2013. By that time, it was developed and all of that. So what we were trying to do at that point was get at least a handful of pilot districts that we could use to find out exactly where we needed to go, what worked, what didn't work. Very good instrument for finding out what kids we need to put what safety nets in place for. We started with those kids that had the red lights. All lights were red. And you're talking about mobility, attendance, behavior, and course performance. I just love that early warning system. I just think it's the greatest thing because it allows us time to get the safety nets in place, but also it removes the excuses that the districts give for why these kids fell through the cracks. Because the early warning system, what it does, it clogs up all of those cracks. So his child should not fall through the cracks. So there are a lot of things that have been put in legislation that districts must do. Every district has to have a dropout prevention plan. They have to have that. Every district has to have an alternative school or behavior mod program. Every district has to, if they're graduating less than 80% at high schools, those high schools must go into restructuring. And that's just the legislative way of backing the Department of Ed, saying these are some things and we're going to help you all move the district forward. We're going to put it in writing.
What we have in the state, our Chamber of Commerce, so to speak, is the Mississippi Economic Council. Early on, we reached out to the leadership of the Mississippi Economic Council to make the case that in order for the state to move forward economically, we had to start early. That high quality early childhood education would lead to economic advancement. The people that we look to in local communities to help advance the cause for early childhood education and education, high quality education in general, is always the superintendent of education, faith-based leaders, business leaders in the community, that range from bankers to small business owners, early child care center directors. We look to board members, and we also look to teachers and parents and students to try to have them all involved in the process, because we feel that the problems can't be solved just working at the grass tops. We have to make sure we work the grassroots to the grass tops in order to make a change in education.
Faith-based organizations, Partners for Public Education, Parents for Public Education. We have people we partner with all the time. They have been absolutely wonderful, especially in providing some of the training for parents. But regardless of who wants to be out front, at the end of the day, they've become partners. So they will walk hand in hand.
I think programs like the programs that we've been able to implement give them hope in sometimes a hopeless situation. And I think it's more pressing for students in rural, isolated areas because there's nothing else there outside of the school, home, church, and the community. And they don't get the type of exposure or opportunities that may be afforded to students living in a more urban area, more urban setting, because they can take public transportation, in some cases walk, or they have access to other, but we're talking school districts and communities that are isolated. Some of these kids have to go 30 to 40 miles just to get to school.
I think the biggest challenge that we face would be maintaining or retaining, however you want to look at, highly qualified teachers in those areas. That's the biggest problem. I think that's the biggest problem, is retaining and keeping those teachers, and then looking at funding for some of the things that they need, and how do you participate in programs like dual enrollment if the nearest community college is an hour away, and those are challenging things also, but we're going to have to think outside the box and get online and maybe do some technology-based programs for dual enrollment and things of that nature.
In rural communities, there tend to be fewer factories, if any, fewer department stores, if any, and so your options for bringing in someone from the business community are really limited. So in a rural community, you really have to kind of dig or sometimes rely on donations or outreach from a major corporation that doesn't necessarily have an office there, but because they serve that community, then getting that particular corporation to buy into doing something with that community. And in rural communities, oftentimes they have to rely on church organizations or very small businesses to get buy-in. And of course, those funds are limited, so fiscal resources are not that great, but sometimes in rural communities you get a lot of human resources that are there to kind of provide support and encouragement and engagement. Serving on the board for the Mississippi Association of Partners in Education, I definitely know that we make a difference in the lives of students across the state. I think we provide validation to teachers, administrators, and also to their business or community or state agency partners, that they made a difference. If you look at elementary schools, and I like to think that elementary schools are where partners make the greatest impact. Young minds are impressionable, and businesses love investing in the younger children.
School and community partnership is a hallmark strategy of dropout prevention. Using an approach that focuses on important leadership skills for successful employment, the Vicksburg Chamber of Commerce is working with schools in its area to prepare students for success in post-education and in life.
I was president of the Chamber of Commerce several years ago, and that's when we first got started in what's called the Leader in Me program.
Well, that initiative began with the Chamber of Commerce, and it was when one of our presidents said he wanted to have a particular thing that focus on for that year, because the Chamber of Commerce mission is to improve the quality of life in this community. And so the Chamber took that on as a project several years ago, and this initiative has been very successful.
Probably the biggest single challenge we had to recruiting new industry, new businesses, was the perception that other nearby communities had better schools than we did. That was not true necessarily, but we did have a perception problem. There's no question about that.
We heard about the Leader in Me program, and in looking into it and doing our due diligence, we found a program that really changed the culture of the schools and taught these 7 habits that I knew as a businessman, that if I could get students who graduated from our schools to come to work for me and had learned these 7 habits, that they would be responsible, they would know how to do teamwork, they would know how to work with others, they would know how to resolve conflict, know how to set goals, all of the kinds of things that we as employers need in our employees.
I was at a conference in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we actually were listening to a principal from a school called A.B. Combs. She brought her students on stage, and these students were incredible. They spoke in front of a crowd of over 1,500 people, probably 2,000 or even more, and they were confident and they had a real control of where they were going in life, and that really resonated in the audience, and you could see that from where we sat. And I started wondering, how can we get that for students here?
Dana Road is a pre-K through 3rd grade elementary school. We have approximately 700 children who attend school here. And when I became principal at Dana Road about a little over 2 years ago, I got a phone call from the then director of the chamber, executive director, Christy Kilroy, and she wanted to make sure that I was aware that they were offering to fund some schools with the Leader in Me initiative. And then she invited me to go to some of the other schools here in town who had actually implemented the program. And at that point I said, okay. But it wasn't a, you just get it. We had to actually pitch for it.
Initially when we started out, we wanted to raise the money up front to be able to say to schools that we were ready to go. And we assured every businessman that put up money that we were not going to institute this program in any school that was not 100% bought in, and that this was not something where we wanted to have the school superintendent of education just say, this is a program we are going to present. We wanted the schools to want to have this program.
At the same time, we were raising money through our sponsors and our business community, and we needed to be able to promise them that we were going to spend this money the best that we could in our community and in their schools, and that we really felt that we would have results.
I can tell you, emotionally, it is amazing for me to have seen this take place in our building. I don't think that there is any way possible that everyone who has donated and made this possible for these children has any idea the impact that they've had. It's a phenomenal thing for our children. I know that I said earlier that the assistant who talked said if you could affect one child, it would be worth every penny. I can't tell you the impact they've had on hundreds of children. And over time, it'll be thousands of children. And it's not just about the money, it's about the commitment that they had in making sure that all of the schools knew about this. It's about supporting us when we started to implement it.
I think what we were looking for is a way to reboot the community, if you will, through this initiative. We saw, long term, it's nothing that's going to happen in a week or a day or a short period of time, but this is really a way, if we could get this embedded into our schools, into our young people, and then through them to the parents and other people in the community, that we could really reboot our community and move forward from a different place. And I think we're on the right track for that. I'm very excited.
Each of these schools has a leadership day annually, and I've now there are 2 schools that have been on it for 2 years, so I've been to 4 of those. So 4 different times I've sat down at a table with 7 other adults, one time with a kindergartner, the rest of the times with a first grader. This first grader can tell you with confidence about explain how he's setting goals and tracking himself on his progress on those goals. That's invaluable, and no test score captures that. Now the test scores are going to reflect that later because that kid has learned to operate in the real world, and it's an amazing thing.
And I've always said, with so many teachers going into schools that want to help people, many times we help people not to help themselves. And I saw this as a culture change where we then, the teachers were empowering the students to take care of themselves. And I think that's been in giving them a voice and believing in them. And I think that's a big culture change in education and in schools today.
Being a small district, we weren't able to offer as much on our own. By working collaboratively with a group, and then we're able to offer more what the students need to be successful.
The leveraging of resources, to me, that's the bottom line. There's not enough money in any foundation. There's not enough money in the state coffers or at the State Department of Education. But if we pool the little bit that we have, then we could do so much more.
Some of your rural areas, they have built consortiums for like alternative ed. So you may have 5 or 6 school districts feeding into one lead district. You have a lot of districts that are close to community colleges, dual enrollment, vocational, career and technical ed. They're going there, they're partnering together.
Many times when you have a consortium, this is because they cannot afford or they do not have the resources that they need to actually have an alternative school within that district. So the superintendent goes out and they meet and they talk about coming together and creating a school that would benefit all the students.
When we had our own alternative school last year, we basically had a director and an assistant that worked there. We were set up because we're small. We had teachers coming from the high school and the middle school. We considered what we had in place, and we realized that it wasn't working the best that it could. We were invited over, and the superintendent and myself and one of our school board members came over and toured the building and went through and looked at the program that the consortium had to offer, and thought it would be a better fit and work good with what we had. But cost-wise, it equaled out to be almost the same to be in the collaborative as it is, to provide our own. Plus, I think they're getting better education because they have their own teachers that are here with them all day.
Most of the children that we have here are students because they're here because of behavioral problems. We have a few for academics, but mostly they're here for behavior. When the students first come, I do an intake with them. I sit down and I talk with them. I tell them that this is something to help them. This is to help them to go back to the regular setting so they won't have to come back. And also, we have the counselor. She talks with them. She tries to guide them in reference to the correct behavior. So we do a lot that first day. We go over a lot of procedures and things with them. And I try to get into their heads to find out, what are your expectations? What do you plan to do? How are you going to not come back to us? What are your goals 10 years from now? And many times when they first come in also, I have them to write out, what are you planning on doing? How, or for example, why are you here? How did you get here? What could you have done differently to keep from coming here? So I make them think, these are choices that you made. So let's think about making correct choices.
My role is to find out where their student is functioning in terms of where they are, what they think about themselves, where they want to go, and come up with a plan to help them get there. Most of them are a little resistant at first. They think I'm being nosy, just asking a bunch of questions, trying to get in their business. And sometimes it takes me a while to get them to open up, but I think my persistence and them knowing that I'm not going to stop. You don't have an option here as to say, Miss Shannon, I don't want to talk to you. So I think that's a plus when working with the students. They can't tell me, I don't want to talk to you today and the session is over. They don't have that option. The individual sessions with me are part of their placement at the alternative school. So once they realize that I can't get out of talking to you and I have to talk to you, they tend to open up. And me just going that extra mile to check on you, like if you're sick, and I tell them all the time, if you miss school 2 or 3 days in a row and nobody knows, I'm going to call your house. So they know that I will call, I will reach out and say what's going on. And I think that kind of warms them up more to me, and they're more willing to talk to me at that point.
We know for a fact that we have to get in so many hours of instructional time. Many times some of the parents that are a long distance, they cannot get here. That would be one of the problems that they would say, Ms. Ellington, I don't have transportation, so can I talk with you on the phone? Can I do a conference with you on the phone because I can't get there, or I don't know where the place is?
I call parents. I don't do a lot of home visits because I have kids from 5 different schools and they come from a wide area, so I don't do a lot of home visits. If it's a West Tallahatchie School District student who's here in this community, if there's a need for me to visit the home, I will. But at this point, I haven't had to do that yet. Just being able to reach out to them on the telephone, getting them to come in for a parent conference is what's working right now.
I think the benefit of a program like this is they do have their own teachers assigned to the school. You don't lose the travel time. They have their own subjects that they're teaching. And so I just think it helps the students to be able to continue to progress towards the goals towards graduation and that they need.
me being here is giving me another chance to still learn, have the opportunity to learn a lot of stuff. I've also, though I'm not in my home school, I've still been able to learn a lot of what the teachers have been teaching me here each and every day that I come here. Well, really, you know, I wake up and I say I'm going to school. That is A-okay for me because I know that the teachers here are willing to help me whatever I need help in, and also that I'll always be learning something while I'm here. They need to know that though you make a mistake at your home school and you end up at alternative school, that it's a second chance that'll help you improve on what you need. You know, a lot of people have attitude problems that ends them here at the alternative school. You know, it helps you, it gives you the opportunity to just, you know, it introduces you to a lot of new things that sometimes even your home school does not teach you. I've learned that here at the alternative school, I have a good principal, I have good teachers, I have a backbone support system that'll help me stay up and stay a bright young man.
We're still under 14% as far as our dropout rate, which is pretty good. And so that goes to the hard work that the districts are doing, because finally we were getting the message through that dropout prevention is not the superintendent's job. It's not just the principal's job. It's not just the teacher's job. It's not just the community's job. But everybody working together, because it's everybody's job.